Okay, you're waiting for the audiences to join in. All right, so let's start the panel discussion. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 16th edition of the Online Education Leadership Forum panel discussion series focused on transforming education for human flourishing. Thank you so much for investing your time with us on a weekday. My name is Aryan Salman, and I am the moderator for this panel discussion. Today, we have a stellar panel on transformative pedagogies that will discuss the question, how can we ensure effective blended learning? We'll be discussing the challenges, opportunities, relevance, innovations, strategies, and approaches to implementation of blended learning models to better support generations of young learners. We will explore approaches to blended learning during and beyond the pandemic in an attempt to empower and inspire young leaders like you who are experiencing a dramatic shift due to the challenges posed to education by the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, we will be sharing relevant and related resources with you after the live broadcast. So do check out the event page on our website, globalcitizenshipfoundation.org, after 72 hours, or follow us on our social media profiles to receive the latest updates on the same. In the previous season, that included 15 editions, we explored the various dimensions of education in the times of Corona and beyond. The recordings of the previous 15 panel discussions and the live broadcast of this panel discussion are available on our website and on our social media channels, including YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So join us on our social media pages and be part of our current and future initiatives. We continue to live in increasingly challenging times, quite uncertain, with enormous changes and disruptions to our lives and our professions. It is a moment for us to assume active global citizenship and support those in need. Having said that, I would like to take this moment to mark a minute of silence for those who have lost their lives to the pandemic, the grieving individuals and families, and in solidarity with academics, education leaders, and young people in Afghanistan who are facing hardships and brutal attacks on academic freedoms and their future. Now we ring the bell to thank and honor the healthcare workers, our educators, and others on the front line who carry out essential roles selflessly, continuing their day-to-day duties inside and outside the home in support of us all. Thank you. The Online Education Leadership Forum was started to provide a platform for educational leaders to shape, empower, influence, and advance the discourse on and be a springboard aiding action towards transforming education for human flourishing. The COVID-19 pandemic has pushed educational leaders, educators, and practitioners to rethink pedagogies, content, delivery, technologies, and strategies. The pandemic coerced students and educators to adapt to a new normal by adopting online learning, one that bore little resemblance to the way educators engaged before the pandemic. It would be safe to say we are at a pivotal moment in history as we see the reshaping of educational landscapes around the world. As many countries have either reopened or are preparing and planning to reopen educational institutions, hybrid learning and blended learning models such as flipped classrooms and supplemental blended learning have received considerable attention and focus in efforts to better support young learners. Many today believe that blended and hybrid learning is the way forward and the future of how we educate generations of young people. Though recognized as approaches that provide greater student agency and learner autonomy in choosing their own ways of learning, it has also raised concerns such as inequitable access exacerbating the already existing digital divide, poor implementation owing to limited upskilling of educators in blended or hybrid learning pedagogies, and challenges in implementing consistent, credible, and effective assessments. It is in this context that through this stellar panel, we reflect on questions such as how How effective can blended learning be? Are existing blended learning models sufficient, or is there a need to innovate blended learning to suit the emerging situation? How can countries implement blended learning the right way? And in general, how can we ensure effective blended learning? Through the online Educational Leadership Forum online series, the Global Citizenship Foundation and the Council for Global Citizenship Education are committed to support educational leaders and educators by connecting experts, practitioners, and educational leaders from across the globe to discuss and share critical and innovative ideas, best practices, and perspectives aimed at transforming education for human flourishing. So our goal today is, whatever your role is in the education sector, that you will come away with something, a new idea, a fresh perspective, a new strategy that you can apply to be more successful at doing what you're doing best, while ensuring the much needed continuous professional development required to transform education for human flourishing. So here's the format to give you an idea of what to expect. First, we'll take a few minutes to introduce you to our stellar panelists from China, France, India, the United States, and the United Arab Emirates. Then I'll kick off the conversation by opening the floor to the panelists. During the discussion, you can engage in 3 ways. You can use the reaction button at the bottom toolbar to express and encourage the panel. You can use the Q&A tab on the right side and ask your questions during the panel discussion. And the third thing that you can do is use the chat box to express your ideas and join the discourse actively. In the second half of our event, we will focus on and highlight your questions on the screen and address them live. This way we can create a learning and engaging experience for all. The idea, after all, is to navigate the present and upcoming opportunities, issues, and challenges together to transform education for human flourishing. Sounds good? Great. Let's get started with the panel introductions. Such a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Anatoly Oleksienko. Dr. Anatoly Oleksienko is the researcher of international higher education whose scholarship shapes contemporary understandings of governance and leadership dilemmas in university systems affected by institutional rigidity and managerialism. Born and educated in Ukraine, Dr. Oleksienko pursued his postgraduate studies in the UK, and Canada, and received his PhD in theory and policy studies of higher education at the University of Toronto. Currently, he's an associate professor of international higher education and director of the Comparative Education Research Center at the University of Hong Kong, China. I take great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Ashok K. Pandey. Dr. Pandey is the chairperson of the Council for Global Citizenship Education and director of Alcon Group of Schools, India. He's the recipient of the National Teachers Award by the President of India in 2012 and the Lifetime Achievement Award by Ferguson Humanitarian Foundation International. Dr. Pandey sits on the governing council of India's National Teacher Education Council. It is my profound pleasure to welcome Dr. Christopher Hill. Dr. Christopher Hill has worked in transnational education since 2008 in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. His research and teaching interests include the impact of transnational education, the role of online learning, and the student experience in the global arena. Dr. Hill hosts the Think Education podcast. It is my delightful pleasure to welcome Dr. Divina Fraumer. Dr. Fraumer is the professor of media and ICT sociology at Sorbonne Nouvelle University, France. She is a specialist in cultural diversity, internet governance, and media and information literacy. She holds the UNESCO chair, Savior Devinier, in Sustainable Digital Development, Mastering Information Cultures since 2013. She was granted the Global MIL Award by UNESCO and the Alliance of Civilizations for her massive online open course, DIY Media and Information Literacy. She is an MIL expert with UNESCO, with the Council of Europe, with the European Union. She is co-author and co-editor of more than 30 books and 300 scholarly articles and book chapters. I take great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Roy Schwartzman. Dr. Schwartzman is a full professor and head of the Department of Communication Studies at the University of North Carolina and at Greensboro, United States. Over the last 20 years, Dr. Schwartzman has authored dozens of publications reflecting the depth of his research, teaching, and course design experience with online education. Dr. Schwartzman founded the Facebook mega group, Pandemic Pedagogy, a global hub for educators and students adapting to the pandemic. Now I open the floor to the panelists by requesting Dr. Schwartzman to make his initial remarks.
I think he's muted. Aryan?
Yes, Dr. Schwartzman.
Lost connection.
All right. So sorry about it. Dr. Schwartzman will connect with us as soon as he can. I'd request Dr. Christopher Hill in the meantime to make his initial remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm based here in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai, and I've been working, like most of my colleagues, in higher education remotely and from home for the past sort of 18 months. I've only just recently gone back onto campus. Prior to the pandemic, I was doing some sort of online teaching or blended learning on flipped classroom, been working in that space for a while, but obviously like everybody else had the baptism of fire with the one day you're on campus, one day you're home and, make do. And so I'm very interested to learn from colleagues around the world about their responses and their experiences. One of the biggest issues I've had with online learning, and I think one of the questions that speaks the most to how do we ensure effective blended learning is the issue of engagement. I know there'll be a lot of conversations about assessment and sort of monitoring and practice, but I think good teaching comes down to engagement, whether you're face-to-face or you're online. And that's been a particularly difficult issue to manage here. I've taught for 4 terms with no cameras on. So students don't turn cameras on, which makes the use of online learning very, very complicated. And there's issues of engagement, issues of interaction, issues of understanding, issues of are people actually there and participating. And so I think one of the questions we perhaps could unpick a little bit, and this is less about the use of technology, and this is more about a pedagogical use of how we teach, is how we engage people. And I think that's a fundamental question for us as teachers in the classroom as it is online. And I think that issue of engagement is critical. The technology doesn't need to be flashy. It doesn't need to be perfect, but the method of engagement needs to be very, very strong, because without that, we're obviously a little bit lost. So I've experienced the positives and negatives. I've enjoyed the flexibility. I've seen my students flourish from having that sort of independent learning and access. But I've also seen the other side where there's very much a barrier between what's happening in the learning space. And I think that's a fundamental question we need to think about throughout the course of this panel. I think that might be less than 5 minutes, but maybe somebody else can take the extra time. So thank you once again for the invitation, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what colleagues have to say and information to share.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hill. I yield the floor to Dr. Oleksienko.
Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to join this distinguished panel. I'm a professor of higher education studies, and my focus is on how adult learners learn through universities and academic programs that undergo significant change. So behind me on the right, you can see a flip chart, and on the left, there's a television. And these were innovations years ago. And frankly speaking, when I came to this room, these teaching means were not deliberately placed, and I didn't choose just to project them and talk about them. But then I realized they're here, right? And I would never use them in my class. Now, in all my classes, I use primarily Zoom or other platforms, Teams. I engage all the means that exist online somewhere there. So all these other means become in the rooms or in the classrooms become really redundant. And my focus in this panel probably will be more on design and management of the courses. I was in charge of establishing a master degree program in higher education, I worked with the managers of universities and colleges who help develop services for students and faculty members. And from that point of view, I always thought about the services organized by those who would be able to think independently, but also listen to others and try to understand what are the needs and learning styles that these students that come to campus have, and how these differences could be accommodated on the campus. So for me, the blended learning process is that management of various resources that campuses have, but also resources that students on the other side of the learning platform may not really understand well or may not be able to work with, right? So resources. Hong Kong is very well resourced place. We have rich resources for higher learning. At the same time, students who come to our campuses may have little skill to engage the resources, especially during very intense programs, intensive learning programs like master degree program in higher education, when they have limited time. They have to complete many assignments, and many of them want to succeed. It's a culture of examination and anxiety about tests. So students are really concerned about how they perform, and from that point of view, we deal with a lot of these psychological tensions and affective learning challenges, while we try to blend all kinds of means of education. And the major problem, I probably just have 1 more minute just to kind of problematize the whole thing, is who manages the whole process of blending? What is being blended and how? Who blends it for whom? And what is the role of students in blending these various means and styles and needs that they have and their peers have? Many of them have to work in collaborative projects and collaborating teams. So they need to develop all these skills in the process, and many of them actually achieve a lot in the process by meeting the challenge, facing the challenge, and trying to overcome the challenge. But at the same time, we as teachers also have this type of concern about our ability to manage the whole process. And sometimes I think we try to manage to the extent that we overmanage and over administrate, because we still feel that that teachers have the major role to play in the whole process of blended learning, right? So we just kind of overdo, over-assess, over-stress out over, and created sometimes that type of anxiety, which then spills over onto students. So the question for me is here, how, in terms of managing the whole process and designing the programs of blended learning, the question for me is, where is the agency? Who is in charge? Who takes responsibility for the whole blended learning approach? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that one, Dr. Alexienko. I yield the floor to Professor Divina from May.
Yes, thank you, Ariane. Thank you all for having me. I'm very happy to share experiences. I think, like a lot of us who have been 18 months without face-to-face with students and exchanging about this experience, it's important to share, because I think it's crucial that we don't go back to the old blended, that we don't go back to teachers at university putting a PDF on any very classical LMS system and leave it there. So I come from a big experience that we conducted in Europe, creating massive online courses as the new way of going blended. We created a platform that is available in several languages, that is called Echo Learning. And we tried to take into account the positions of participants, including in mobility. They're able to download their courses on mobiles, so that, and also people with disabilities. And so that the engagement part is partly covered with this idea that you do it at your time and in whatever place you're comfortable with. That was before COVID. This experiment that we conducted in Europe was not fully successful, not in the sense that the platform is not working and etc., but in terms of adoption by universities. Universities definitely saw MOOCs as a kind of challenge to their monopoly on education, design, and the certification. The rate of adoption by universities was very low in France. Even and in the rest of Europe, actually. So we really moved more towards the e-learning per se, the learning sphere, on higher and mostly continuous education. And I think that's definitely where a lot of the needs are appearing. And so to complement with some of the issues my colleagues have already pointed out, I think with COVID, what we realized is that we could move online, but the limit now is teacher training and the training of trainers, which is to say the capacity not just to do it for yourself, but to also transfer that capacity to train others and get that kind of autonomy. Because I think if we don't do that, we're going to go back to the old normal. And I don't want to be there, because I think there are advantages to the blended. A lot of resources are already out there. Some people have learned, they liked that and would like to continue. Some students also have found a pleasure in some of the resources. And so I'm working at the moment on MOOCs that we call SMOOCs, meaning social MOOCs, participatory MOOCs if you want, and we're moving towards T-MOOCs, transfer MOOCs, which is to say training people to create their own content, design their own content, and feel comfortable that they are not starting from scratch and they're not losing the quality that they are in the habit of expecting of their own teaching. So I would put the emphasis on that. And we have been helped actually by a combination of structures. And I think we've all become, and it's part of a T-MOOC, adept at using several platforms and not depending on just one. We've all learned, of course, about Zoom, etc. And there's a Zoom fatigue, but there's also Zoom energy. And so a combination of depositing content, then activating it via Zoom workshops, etc., putting it on some social media so as to share and receive feedback, and then reappropriating this on the platform seems to me one of the virtuous cycles we've all learned to develop, or where I would like education, live or online, to go to. So that's definitely one of the elements. And to go in the sense of, I think it's Dr. Hill who was mentioning that, the need to engage is not about being IT perfect. But it seems to me it's connected to what I call remix culture that is out there among our students who have resources that we don't think of, we're not aware of, but that may work, that they can share. And so the transfer MOOC is also partly transfer from the participants and across the participants, taking advantage of a relative wealth of resources that are out there, that are not all academic, but can nonetheless be extremely effective. And one of our jobs, maybe as people who are training them, is to help them decide the quality of a resource and how to use it when it's external and not just university validated. So I think, to me, that's what's going to keep people motivated, sharing, participating. And what I try to develop also theoretically, and I'm not the only one, and I'll finish there, is this idea of e-presence. What is it to be present online? And for me, the idea of presence is because I don't think being distant makes you far. We've seen that we could do a lot of things like now, we're exchanging, we're looking at each other in the eye. We have e-presence right now. So it's not so much presence, distance that is a problem. The real problem is absence. When people drop out, when people feel this is not for me, or I can't achieve there. So that's the real fight. To me. But e-presence is about cognitive knowledge, of course, cognitive presence. It's about emotional and social presence, and having the courage to participate, to contribute, to criticize without demolishing somebody. These are skills we need to learn to put in place in this transfer of knowledge. But also, e-presence is about designed presence, being aware that each platform has a design, and this design is constraining. And my problem right now, especially with Europe, is that these designs come from America, and they come from commercial platforms whose interest is flux, is collecting data, and is not necessarily pedagogically designed. And so I'm urging the EdTech, the educational technology people, to please come and modify, make more dynamic our traditional LMSs, allow us to incorporate several other apps and structures so that we can have a dynamic and engaging form of blended learning.
Thank you so much for that take, Dr. Fromir. In fact, I just want to build on to what Dr. Fromir had said about LMSs. So we have Traverse Link that you can go have a look. It's traditionally, it's quite different from the traditionally available LMSs. So do have a look. It's from Europe. So that's one interesting take we have. In the meantime, I would ask Dr. Schwartzman to please make his initial remarks. Dr. Schwartzman?
Yeah. He's
All
back.
right.
Yeah.
I'm afraid we are not able to hear Dr. Schwartzman still. It's surprising that, Dr. Schwartzman has been trying to connect for quite some time. It's very unfortunate that we are not able to hear him out. I'll wait for a few more minutes and come back to Dr. Schwartzman if his connection is, if it gets better. So in the meantime, I request Dr. Pandey to make his remarks.
Yeah. Thank you, Aryan. And I think it appears that I have a lot of time. The other distinguished professors have left out for me. But first, I want to make two things, Aryan, with your permission, that I am simply in awe of the presence and the wisdom of these distinguished professors. They come from huge experience. They have been into online teaching and blended teaching even before the COVID happened. And therefore, I was absolutely thrilled to get the insight. So say, for example, Dr. Christopher talked about how engagement and pedagogy is more important rather than paraphernalia of the entire ed tech itself. And managing resources, is something that we have to keep in mind, which Dr. Anatoly was talking about. But a new concept has come. Professor Devina was talking about, the social and participatory and transfer MOOCs, training the teachers, and very important thing which I think we should publicize, and if Dr. Devina permits, we should quote her that there is nothing fundamentally wrong with online education unless one chooses to drop out. I think that was something profound, in my opinion. So, having said that, let me put a caveat here, that the online or blended teaching for the adult students, university, college students, and lifelong learners is slightly different from the online education of the young children. As young as 3 years and 4 years, and maximum up to 16 and 17 years. And therefore, these 18 months of experience suggests to me that two or three things are very, very important. Number one, if we want to make blended teaching effective, as you are seeking out today through these discussions, the shift in our approach to the culture of teaching and learning, in our approach to pedagogy, and in our approach to structure is very, very important, which means that do we make it sure that we want every child to succeed, so equity and excellence for every child. So how do we make technology accessible to all of them? How do we ensure that the learning gaps are taken care of, right? And then, of course, the pedagogy is pedagogy responsive to the needs of all the children? Do we have a mechanism through which we can swiftly and in a differentiated manner respond to the needs of the children? Structurally, are we in a position that we have a very candid, compassionate, explicit, communication to tell them what the expectations are, what could be their pathways, and how they can proceed on that, and how they can be mentored by the teachers, even in the blended learning approach. So this is one aspect of it. And the second aspect, in my opinion, is that we have to take some kind of inspiration from the universal design of learning. And universal design of learning at Pillars suggests that we have to be very, very mindful of what we call the diverse classes. We have to be mindful of the fact that for the learners, it has to be an exciting learning experience and opportunity. Likewise for the teachers also. So how to ensure that every child is a participant, every child is a beneficiary, and the mechanism has responded to all of them. And therefore, we come back to the question that what will be the new design and architecture of the learning spaces in the cyber space. So say, for example, some children will be able to come to schools, some will not be able to come due to their own circumstances and backgrounds. On the other hand, certain curricular requirements will make it mandatory for the children to come. And if they are not able to come, then how do you respond to that? And the third challenge before the blended learning is that how we can make it interventional. So say, for example, if children are not able to come, or even if they have chosen to come for a couple of days, and if couple of days they are on home, can we give them flexibility to come or be on the virtual mode? Can they work alone? Can they work with their peer group? I think depending upon this, is spreading the menu card and making it as flexible as possible to include the maximum number of children, in fact all the children, is the challenge of the blended learning, in my opinion. And as we go forward, probably I can elaborate on some of them. Thank you, Aryan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pandey, for your take. So we'll get into the next round of our discussion. So here we have the panelists, a round of questions. So I would request Dr. Pandey to ask one question to any of the other panelists.
My question for Professor Devina is ready. Madam, please elaborate upon your SPT MOOCs, social, personal, and transfer. Please.
It's going to be difficult in a few minutes, but it's true that we had to work a lot on the pedagogical design, and the major idea was to try to withdraw the teacher from being the center of attention, and not just be a teacher. And so one of the first ways we did it was by having a lot of intermediaries between us and the teachers. We had volunteers, we had mentors, we had tutors, and they were acting by proxy in a way, and they were making it easier for participants to address us. Then we would have live events where we would have Q&A, moments of questions and answers. But in fact, as a result, we decided that, in fact, teachers and trainers need a lot of scenario training. Okay. And that was a major request that came, particularly we've done a few MOOCs with Tunisia. And among the 3 or 4 scenarios that were easier to do online and that the teachers adopted, one of them was enabling people to debate, how to debate. It's not just putting people in one room, 2 camps, and sending each other insults, which, and when you take topics like mine in media literacy that are related to disinformation, to hate speech, you are looking for trouble in terms of how to deal with these issues. But debating became one of the favorite tools for sending messages, for having peer interaction, for people who would not dare usually venture an idea or a question. Because in fact, as soon as we tell people, a debate, you can prepare it 2 or 3 days in advance for several hours. You don't get there just and hot. We cool. And that can be prepared in the workshops for that. So that was very successful. Another thing, of course, which is to do with all our blended approaches, and they often are based on the do-it-yourself approach and learning by doing. And so one of the things we've done is make people play the role. And for instance, in disinformation, we ask people to play the role of a fact checker. People think usually, fact checkers, that's a job as journalists, there's very few of them, etc. We tell them, no, there's a few tools. You can use TNI, reverse I, etc. And you have a hunch that this is a fake news, well, check it. And so suddenly they realize there's a lot of things they can share about that. And another option, of course, is to empower them to produce some content of their own. Because then they go through all the questioning about, all these resources out there, are they good? Are they sourced? Is mine is enough verified, etc., etc. So taking a tool, and of course you have Instagram, you have TikTok, you have plenty of ways today with the social media of creating some resources cheaply. But the fact of thinking about the content they'll put online, how it will be perceived, how they should double check it, etc., is by itself a learning process that is very valuable. So we've been reinforcing these 3 or 4 strategies. There's many others, but already giving them this spectrum from the exchanging to the creating yourself and daring to publish it and suffer the consequences, etc. These have all been learning things that enable you and as a teacher to encourage that e-presence I was talking about and getting people to be global citizens and be out there in the real world and not just in the very safe and closed environment of the traditional classroom.
Thank you, Professor Devina. You have received many claps and vows from the audience. You may acknowledge that.
All right, Professor Frommer, if you can ask one question to any other panelists on the dais, that would be great. Professor, if you
My
can
question,
unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. My question was actually for Anatoly, because I think he has a lot to share with us about this idea of design that he put forward. And so, because it's not just design, but you connected it with management. And as we know, therein lies the crux.
Yes, thank you very much. This is also a very big area for discussion. Let me just probably choose one particular case. We always think about the role of teachers in the process. To what extent teachers should be in charge of the whole process? They definitely play a significant role in terms of setting the whole course and also creating the assessment scheme in terms of formative assessment and summative one. And at the same time, they are viewed by students as somebody very important. So students usually expect that teachers would guide them into the process of blended learning. At the same time, teachers also want their students to take more responsibility for the learning outcomes, and which makes sense because in a way, learning is becoming significant when students feel that they can work with that knowledge and apply that knowledge in very specific areas of economic, political, or social development. So they need to develop that sense of agency in the whole process. At the same time, there's a gap, I think, which is developed in the process. And this gap, I attribute this gap to the technological change. The change that takes place pretty much all the time, and the change that makes life for teachers more difficult every time, because once they come as young teachers to faculties of education, pedagogical universities, they have time to play around with all technologies. They have time to read and engage with peers and probably even become develop leadership skills in terms of using the technology, because they have time. But once they move into profession, their time for learning reduces because they have other demands. They have to manage their students, and very often we find that they deal with minutiae, like with small things, administrative work, responsibilities of that kind, and their time for learning significantly reduces. They definitely develop those practical skills while working in classes, but their ability to work with innovative products, with innovative processes, actually seems to be reducing over time. So the question for designers is how to create these communities of practice for teachers who can continue to learn when they move out of pedagogical institutions and move into schools or colleges and universities. How these communities of practice can continue to contribute to the peer-to-peer sharing and education, how this professional lifelong learning can be sustained over time. So for designers of these blended learning programs, it's pretty much a question. I take it to probably to a larger policy level. discussion in terms of how teachers are supported. Teachers in schools, but also teachers in colleges, teachers in universities, how are they supported in terms of their innovative development? And it's not only about the requirement from institution that they do it in terms of performance, but also in terms of support that they have from teaching assistants, maybe from administrative staff, which we also see as reducing in many institutions, because as most recent papers in higher education point out, there's been a shift in terms of executive positions in administration growing and support positions in administration coming into decline. So in a way, those who would need to provide services in administration are few, while the executive echelons are getting larger. So the question is like how we really create those types of policy environments where teachers are encouraged to develop blended learning approaches, but also get more of this admin support, admin service rather than I would emphasize services in particular, not administration, not management, not top-down management, but services to the processes of teaching. So that would be probably. I just kind of made a couple of points here. I probably will not try to monopolize the time. I know that other colleagues have some valuable things as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oleksienko. I would request you to ask one question to any of the other panelists.
I would like to ask Dr. Hell about the point he made about the camera students trying not to use cameras. Do you see it as a problem or as an opportunity in terms of freedom of learning, in terms of the agency? Does that create more freedom or agency, or does it create more problem for the learning process? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's an excellent question. And I think the answer dramatically changes depending on the perspective of the person asking the question. Because I've had conversations, the bulk of my students are all teachers. And so I've had some very surreal conversations where I'm looking at a black screen and I'm teaching on a module about ICT and engaging learning. And my students are complaining that their students don't turn on cameras. And my students are saying it's so difficult to teach when you can't see people's faces. It's so hard to engage. It's so hard to, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going, you understand the irony, right? That your camera's off. And like, yeah, no, we know. But we like the freedom of having our camera off. Okay, so there are, I think it's neither one nor the other. Certainly there is tremendous freedom in being able to sit in your own space, dressed how you want to be, relaxed and listening or engaging in a different way. I think this maybe comes back to Protovinia's point about we don't want to go back to the old way. And I think the question we need to ask is, in a face-to-face classroom, were we fully engaging our students? And the answer is, of course, no. Not all students are engaged all the time just because they're face-to-face. And so I think because the pandemic wasn't online learning in the sense that it could have been, it was disaster relief, or it was panic, or it was, the first couple of months or the first couple of weeks, people thought, oh, it's going to go away. And then we panicked and we didn't know, and people are worried about jobs and health. And there's a lot of my students had multiple people learning in the same house, sharing devices. And so the environment was very fraught. And then I think as we got through 2 or 3 terms, people settled into a rhythm where they're like, no, I'm comfortable learning like this. And the barrier was the teacher saying, but I can't see you. And if I can't see you, I don't know you're there. And if I don't know that, and a lot of it's holding on to an assumption of what engagement is, and a view of traditional teaching. But that aside, I think there is something very much about the interaction that happens on a human level, about being in the same room with people, whether you're able to read their body language, whether you're able to simply have a sense of community that isn't necessarily built on the digital. And so I think the answer is neither yes nor no. And I've experienced it both at the same time in one class, which is always a very strange occurrence. And I think one of the things your question highlights, and I think this speaks to again to Prof. Davinia's point, we need to, and indeed to your own initial one, we need to very much think, how are people learning? You know, the emphasis is not on the teacher, the emphasis should be on the learner, and how are they receiving the information and how are they processing the information, and what is the best way to do that. I did a bit of research pre-pandemic and then during the pandemic about online group work and sort of behavioralism and how people construct groups and how they engage. And it's very interesting that actually the social aspect from a visual perspective was much lower than what I assumed it would be. The flexibility, the freedom, the engagement were positives. Time management and technology were sort of the counter. But the actual visual seeing people wasn't as high as I thought it would be, from a sort of everybody stuck in the house, you want some form of human contact. And indeed, we had, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were sort of running these, additional seminar and workshop groups within our standard modules because students were craving connection. And even in that crave of connection, they didn't turn their cameras on. And so actually, I've started to think a lot more about the assumptions of what visual means, and whether that assumption is about trust or whether that assumption is about, engagement or what it might be. So I think it's a positive and a negative. I think it plays very different at different age groups. Children, younger age group, I think that visual is critical. As you get older, and particularly to postgraduate, I think there's probably a lot more flexibility with that. So that's probably a very good academic answer, in that I haven't said anything other than talk for 5 minutes. Oh, the bell, just.
All right. So, Dr. Hill, if you
For a
can
rescue.
direct your question to one of the panelists. I'd really like to try if we can hear Dr. Schwartzman. Dr. Schwartzman, if you can just say hello before Dr. Hill asks his question, that would be great. Okay. I need some help from the audience. Can you hear Dr. Schwartzman? This is really unfortunate for us that we could not hear Dr. Schwartzman. In the meantime, you can look at the draft that Dr. Schwartzman has shared with all of us. So I think that's a very interesting document. So thank you, Dr. Schwartzman. I'll try coming back to you again. Dr. Hill, I'm so sorry. You can please ask your question.
No, not at all. I think I'd like to, I have a question for almost everybody, but I think I'd like to ask, or in a sense, give Dr. Ashok an opportunity to maybe give us a little bit more information about this equity and access issue, because obviously those of us that work in the online space, online learning was going to be the savior of education pre-COVID, and cost, access, equity, they are massive problems, and we're fully aware of this. And so I'm very interested to hear more of your thoughts on how we more readily acknowledge and begin to deal with this. I don't ask to solve, because solve requires a tremendous amount of infrastructure and resource. But I'm just very interested to hear your further thoughts on the issue that you brought up.
Absolutely, thank you, Dr. Hill. You have been very kind in asking this question. First of all, you just imagine that these many children, more than 300 million children in India alone were home locked, right? And we said that we are doing things through digital and things like that. But even globally also, it is not more than 50% of the children who had access to technology. And therefore, what we are talking about is that if you have a spectrum of digital maturity of the children, I think it will be less than 30% who have a good internet and bandwidth, who have a device to themselves, and who have a nice place where they can sit and study. This category, I don't think more than 25 to 30% children will come. And on the other hand, 30 to 40% of the children have no access internet and technology and device. And therefore, just about 30 to 40% of the children, they may have internet and bandwidth, but they have a sharing device, sharing with the siblings, sharing with the parents. During a particular time, they have the device. They don't have the device all the time. So that has caused a problem. As it is, the research, at least one McKinsey research has found that even the places where the lockdown was for less than 10 to 12 weeks, there were learning losses, owing to the problem and the disease and, the grief and the overall psyche and sentiments. But places where maximum lockdowns like India and Africa and other places, 60 to 70 weeks, I think the learning losses are to the tune of 50 to 60%. So one is due to the absence, other is due to the virus, and then the perpetuating learning losses. That has created a new phase of inequality, a new phase of challenge to bring all these problem on board. So that is what I was referring to. And therefore, this equity and excellence has become a new challenge for the educators, for the governments, and for the policymakers. So that was the thing that I was trying to make out in my opening remarks. And since you have already given me the permission not to think of solutions at this stage, I think highlighting the problem is something that I have done. Over to you, Dr. Christopher. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Pandey. I had a question for Dr. Schwartzman from his discussion. However, I think we'll try reconnecting with Dr. Schwartzman. So in the meantime, I have this particular comment with which I would like to begin the moderator's question round. So as you can see the question here by Ulana, so she shared this: the choice to have a camera off also relates to the matter of the peripheral learner. The key is how to move them to a position of centrality that is keeping the camera on. So would you like to take this question, Professor Hill?
Okay, well, thank you for the promotion. Yeah, it's a very good point. And there's been a fair amount of literature and discussion talking about why people don't put cameras on. There are cultural issues, there are religious issues, there are bandwidth issues, there are a host of, and they are all perfectly valid. And I think it's entirely possible to have a conversation where you say pedagogy dictates you really should have your camera on so I can see you, which is a valid argument. But the cultural norms or the individual experience of the learner is an equally valid one. And so they are neither right nor wrong, right? They are very contextually bound. But this term about the centrality of the learner, I think is an excellent one. And this is what I was sort of trying to get at in my waffle when I was answering the question, is what is important for the learner and the way in which they learn information. Because obviously, we can argue relative success or failures of MOOCs, but the engagement with MOOCs is done as an independent learner and is very reluctantly through camera engagement, right? There are methods where learning takes place very successfully that doesn't involve the face-to-face. And so I think it's a useful term to employ. How do we put the learner to the center of the experience? And so how do we build a learning experience that is engaging and informative and is perhaps interactive in other ways that doesn't involve the visual, where the visual is not possible? We've experimented with things like the main room of the class. Most students have their cameras off, but maybe when they go into the small breakout groups, they turn on the cameras because there's less people. But I found that the barriers to putting on a camera are greater than the concern of the student over loss of engagement. And until the issue of I can't have a camera pointing in my house, or I can't have a camera where I don't have people recording me, or I don't have the bandwidth to do that, until those questions are acknowledged and dealt with, the ministry dictates you must have your camera on, but people don't put the camera on. You must have your camera on for exams, but you don't. So you're then looking at penalizing somebody who has very real contextual, values for not putting them on, and that becomes a discriminatory process. And then the counterargument says, well, you'd be face to face if you were in a classroom. Yes, and so you go back and forth and back and forth, and we cannot. This is absolutely digital. It's not binary, right? There isn't a simple solution to this problem. There isn't a simple, and we've solved it, because the massive disparity in access and engagement and opportunity is such that this is not a single experience. And then, Dr. Anatoly pointed about how do adult learners learn. There are different ways that we learn as we grow, within the process. And so there's no single answer to this. And I think too easily, online learning or blended learning or hybrid learning or digital learning has been dismissed as, well, it wasn't perfect in the pandemic. Of course it wasn't perfect in the pandemic. We're in a global pandemic, right? Nothing's perfect. So, I think putting the learner central is a very good way for us to begin that conversation, and then we build from that.
Yeah, Aryan, may I come in here just quickly?
Absolutely, Dr. Pandey.
I think Dr. Christopher has perhaps said the last word on this problem, and I would only, venture to add to that is that this quarrel over camera not being on is not worth our time, because as he rightly put, the reasons for not putting the camera on far outweigh to the efforts that we make to put it on. And therefore, I think learning and engagement should be the primary focus, right? Because at the end of the day, we cannot regulate and we cannot make it mandatory for a variety of reasons. And therefore, as educators, we have to, innovate as to how we can teach effectively just looking into our cameras on our laptops rather than bothering about whose cameras are on or not. I think that is the lesson at least we have learned in these 18 months.
Thank you so much for that one, Dr. Pandey.
Yes,
Professor Alexia.
Can I also speak on that issue? Thank you, Lena, for that question. In fact, I had this dilemma, and I approached one of the students. I asked them, why do you keep your cameras, off, and isn't it better just to communicate with each other with open faces and so on? I said, no, it's not. Actually, the faces distract from learning, because, and I realized that once in the past, they would sit in the class and they would face and see me, and maybe sometimes with peripheral vision, one of their peers. But once the faces are open and you have a gallery of 30 faces, you pretty much begin to jump from face to face and examine emotions, reactions, and whatnot, and you actually lose on the quality of listening, right? And so I began to experiment with that myself, and I said, okay, I will listen to you, and I will switch off my camera. And we will be in equal position. Everyone switches off their camera, and we just listen to each other. It turned out that I began to walk around my computer and think when they were talking, and my listening ability suddenly improved because I was listening to what they were saying rather than dividing my attention between what was said and what I was observing in their faces. And the literature on blended learning pays actually a lot of attention to this affective learning, right? Just affect in terms of emotion, which the issues of why we liked to be learning with particular kind of people or with a certain type of a teacher. So what was generating our affection for the learning space and the learning process, right? So we often forget about the emotional aspect of learning as being something very significant and contributing to satisfaction of the learning process and making the whole learning outcome much, much better. which then we observe probably in the scores for teaching, for scores for design of courses, and so on and so forth. So I would say that sometimes these types of questions about open and closed spaces might be really philosophical. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
I wonder if I could add something here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Welcome.
Wow.
Welcome,
Right.
Mr. Roy.
Yeah, I'm. First of all, I am not ironically enacting what we've just been talking about. I'm playing it safe because for some reason AirMeet likes me either to do video or audio, but not both, and it's not an internet connection issue. But anyway, one thing I'd like to add to this is that, and I've written about this, and the link to that article is in the Dropbox file that I dropped into chat. I think one of the things that we have to take into account is how we have relocated the site of learning, and in online components at least, largely to these, quote, home spaces. Now, home is very problematic. Particularly at my university, we have a lot of students who come from either low income or problematic backgrounds. And by problematic, what I mean is that many of these students, for example, have chosen to come to the university campus as an alternative to a less accepting or less tolerant home environment that's not conducive to either learning or perhaps even their identities. For example, we have a good contingent of transgender students, almost all of whom tell really disturbing stories of lack of acceptance that they do not experience in the campus environment. And one of the things about the whole cameras on debate, I agree that to some degree it's a misguided discussion if it deals with so many of these factors that we cannot, as instructors, as educators, control. So, the best maybe that we can do is provide incentives to turn the camera on. But I totally agree, and were I not struggling constantly to get the technology to work, I really would have put, some of the clapping or heart emojis when I heard all these comments on that I think are absolutely on target about how, pushing the students outside of campus raises some interesting access, equity, and inclusion issues in itself. Because to some degree, the campus is a great equalizer in the fact that there are these ready-at-hand resources. And in blended learning, one of the things we have to do is make sure that some of these ancillary educational resources, such as academic tutoring, such as I had to chuckle as a communication studies professor, about the comments about, oh my gosh, fearing these public presentations is terrifying. Yes. But we have speaking centers that help with oral communication, writing centers that help with written communication. We need, if we're going to really optimize blended learning, maybe a big piece of that is bringing it goes back to all that old online literature that's still pertinent, bringing the education to the students and meeting them where they are, not just in terms of ability levels, but if they're not comfortable, being on camera or something like that, maybe a more private forum where they can incrementally work up to that, if that's something that's desirable for them, could work. So basically, I'm just trying to kind of synthesize these excellent remarks that I have been able to hear and frustratingly not able to contribute to thus far.
Thank you so much for that one, Dr. Schwartzman. My question to Dr. Oleksienko, and perhaps to everyone on the panel, is this: what are the pitfalls that one should avoid while implementing blended learning? So if you can share a few with us, that would be great help.
I will focus probably on three major pitfalls that I experienced during the last decade, and that's making assumptions about students' capacities to handle collaborative and cognitive assignments in the process of blended learning. So different cultures have different perceptions and different ideas of what it means to work with a teacher and with a peer. They have different ideas of where knowledge has weight, authority, and in that regard, it takes time for the peers from different cultures, let us say Chinese culture and Hong Kongese culture, which is a West-East, East-West blended culture, as well as the Western cultures students coming from the West, coming to the same class and receiving the same assignments, may not only be able to understand the value of doing this assignment either independently or in collaboration or on the supervision of the teacher. So let me just kind of, if we need more examples, I can just delve more into that. But the other one would be pretty much about the another pitfall would be the challenge of getting support from the institution in terms of their capacity to provide services, technological services to faculty members and to students, right? Just in general, the universities tend to develop infrastructures which have a one-size-fits-all type of user, but they don't go into these differences, and that's what my colleague Professor Fromex was saying, that these developers do not give us enough flexibility really to play around with the different designs of the program, and we have to be prepared for these types of limitations when we design our courses or programs. We always have to keep our aspirations probably a little bit lower, just kind of trying to target and go with the simpler solutions, despite all the discourse of how great technologies are and then how much innovation we already have in place and so on. So we have to really keep in mind that disadvantaged learner that may not have enough of these capacities and resources and abilities to engage with all types of collaborative designs. So, and the third one would be pretty much the synchronous participation in the blended learning processes. In general, in my courses, students enjoy asynchronicity of learning because they can watch videos, can engage with all kinds of chat rooms within a longer period of time, within going beyond the classrooms or classroom time. So they enjoy that longer period of time. But at the same time, it becomes really harder for everyone then just to follow on the engagement or being responsive enough to student participation in different spaces and times and so on. So in general, there is a lot of admiration for asynchronicity, but at the same time, there's a lot of also there's significant amount of time needed really just from teachers to be engaged in all this. So again, I guess if we say we don't need to be in control of everything, then we can say leave it for students to engage as much as they wish, wherever they wish, and let them learn from each other. The teacher should not be in the center of the whole design. If that approach is okay with everyone, then it's fine. But sometimes it's okay with me, but it may not be okay with my students who come from the culture where the teacher should be at the top, in control, in the hierarchical position, to ensure the authority of and the value of the learning process. So that would be some kind of issues that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oleksienko. I would request Dr. Roy Schwartzman to share a few thoughts around the contention that he made in the Dropbox document, where he spoke about taking blended metaphor quite literally. Why do you think, Professor, that you should neither take online nor face-to-face as a prime way or prime approach to blended learning?
As I become invisible to attempt to answer, well, I think we get into some different. Well, this actually relates to some of the earlier comments of the panelists about this idea of the assumptions that we bring to bear for both online teaching and learning and face-to-face education. All too often, and I'm still seeing this throughout the pandemic, as in the United States particularly, we share a lot of commonality, particularly with the course the pandemic has taken in India. Very, very similar with the Delta variant issues there, and there often is this attitude that forces a choice between online or face-to-face. And ideally, the whole idea of blending is mutual enhancement, that you're leveraging the particular strengths of each modality. You get into self-limitations if you start approaching crafting blended learning from the standpoint of, well, okay, I have this face-to-face course and I'm just going to graft onto it some online components that are, these enhancements. It's almost like, well, not blending, but baking. You're baking a cake, and and basically these online components are the little decorative parts of the cake that you put on there, and you think, well, because there are these flashy multimedia components, maybe that will increase student engagement. I think we have to be judicious about that, and also, on the other hand, know when it's wise to embrace, and I have this kind of polemical comment at the end of my little document, that we need to embrace inefficiency. Sometimes maximum engagement with a student demands inefficiency. Of not going with the quickest and cheapest methods. I think one of the things that kind of forces this discussion of blended learning in the wrong direction is even the structures of course offerings where we're forced to make this binary choice between online or face-to-face. And then hybrid becomes this kind of strange gray area where we're just putting a few little forays into the online components, grafting those onto a face-to-face course doesn't necessarily enhance the course, nor does it really utilize the online components to the greatest capacity. So basically the idea is kind of driving toward possibly, and again, this is kind of a future vision, thinking of this metaphor. We have a lot of food metaphors here, I just realized. A lot of metaphors that we can think of this as kind of this buffet of selections that students have. and it's something that we've done with HighFlex courses. But even in those models, the instructor is still kind of in control of the modalities. And a lot of my students in some of their writing about, I'm teaching a course in pandemic communication actually right now, an asynchronous online course. And a lot of these students are talking about they really want to be able to move back and forth between modalities within the course. It gets to this notion that Dr. Frau-Meigs is talking about of the remixing culture, right? I mean, they want to blend these different modalities and be able to navigate from one to the other. And this really does kind of place learning more in the hands of students, but it may automatically create more engagement because it's on their terms. So maybe a lot of idealism there, but I'd like to think of it as opportunities in a blended learning environment.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that one, Dr. Schwartzman. We are running a bit behind schedule, so I would just like to ask one question to Professor Divina as well as Dr. Ashok Pandey. Blended learning offers a wealth of options. So according to your experience, what do you think are the trade-offs resulting from such a flexibility? Either of you can go ahead first.
Professor Devina first, please. Yeah.
Professor Pandey, I was sort of hoping you would take it.
All right, others can just come in. Yeah.
Can you rephrase it, please? The trade-off idea, I'm not sure I understand your purpose here.
All right, so Professor, when you look at blended learning, there are a lot of options that there are, right? So when you're taking these options, when you're developing your self-paced courses and you're going ahead with blended learning, what are the things that we are letting go of in terms of the traditional structures that we've all been doing, right? So for good or for bad, what are the things that are going off?
I think it depends a lot on where you are in the educational regions. So I can only speak for maybe France and a bit larger level Europe. What you're letting go is your ego as a teacher, because you are trained to be in the center of knowledge for your students, and suddenly you're not anymore. And somebody who has a very good YouTube channel on your topic is going to be the right resource, and it's not you. And so you have to accept that and actually use that as a way of keeping the conversation with your students. And so you have to let go of your own representation of your profession as you were trained in a non-blended learning system. We're asking something very hard to our generation because it's we're in transition, basically. But most of us, and I totally agree with Anatoly, most of our decision makers, they're still coming from the old system. And they don't see the advantage of going blended. I have a feeling that a lot of my colleagues in Europe, and not only there, are still very reluctant to go. So the pandemic has compelled them to do so. But for instance, clearly in Europe and France, I see that the thing people want is to go back to the classroom, go back to. So it's going to be a battle to start telling them, research shows actually there's been more engagement than you think. But yes, you're right, they're still very independent on paper. So why don't you go first online, etc., and then do the paper? You don't put the paper, the PDF or whatever first, let them find that at the end of the course and maybe start from there and engage them first, and then give them the chunk of knowledge you want them to carry forward. And so there's a lot, I think I'm trying to resonate with some of the other conversations. A lot of work to do on ourselves and our profession and what we want it to be. And there are, of course, several models. Canada, other places have shown us that there's other ways to represent the teacher as a co-designer, as a co-learner in many of the cases. But it's still, the institution is still not allowing teachers to do that much. And so you run the risk of just being qualified by your other colleagues as somebody who is pandering to students, trying to please, a crowd pleaser, blah, blah, blah. It's really, I think, at this level where we are now, probably the biggest obstacle, not the trade-off, but the biggest obstacle is definitely how we have constructed universities, bricks and mortar, and how now we are asked to deconstruct them and to do something else. And as Professor Schwartzman was saying, it's not fair to make it an or if, because we are capable now, as for the wealth of this transition period, we can do all of it. And in my experience, we're still going to maintain paper, but the different MOOCs I've done, for instance, our platform and other platforms, they allow you to download some nugget of content, some part of your unit or some unit or granule or whatever, and fall back on it, and go back to it. And a lot of the projects I've done, the students have asked to have, a synthesis, something, the 10 things to take to download them and to put them on paper. It's an answer to the question of access. When not everybody can have access, not everybody is connected, when the bandwidth is not good, falling back onto these things is having this option is still very valid. And all these messages you have to make the decision makers listen to. And they won't, because they have to have quick answers, and it goes down to budget in the end. And they don't want to put most of the budget time where it's needed, which is to say the training of all the teacher body to this change in the representations of a profession. We are still central in the sense that we are a resource. We can be benevolent listeners and pointers to different directions, etc. But it's hard to say, well, okay, we're going to pay you to give advice. So we have to change a lot of things, including the vocabulary about how we describe ourselves, what evaluation is about. At the end of the day, the student will always ask you, so what's my grade? And what I'm telling my colleagues in France, I don't know if the word will translate in English, but when you give an assessment, when you give your paper, in France it's called devoir. You surrender, you give in a duty. I mean, what vision of education inherited from the 19th century calls the paper that you're giving in a duty? So a whole revision, it seems to me, of vocabulary has to be done for teachers to move forward in their heads, so that the decision makers can also move forward in their heads. For me, they are the biggest obstacles. I'd love to leave them behind.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Aryan.
much. Yes, Dr. Pandey.
So I think very quickly, thank you, Dr. Devina. You have saved me also. But this blended learning, Aryan, if you talk about, it's about balancing the losses and the profits, right? If we have to have, let go many things, I think we have got many things as well. And we have taken many things upon ourselves as our responsibility and duty. So first of all, despite compromises we had to make to that authoritarian ship among the teachership, that, well, we are responsible for you and we will do everything possible on the online teaching. Haven't we done that, right? And then sometimes we went overboard as well, that we thought that no, whatever could be done face to face, let me try why it cannot be done on the online also. So I think we have gone sometimes positively overboard also. And that could be counted amongst one of the pitfalls also, which Dr. Anatoly was talking about in the beginning. But the only thing is, despite everything, I think teachers have made it sure that the learner is in the center of everything. And I think that is the essence of teaching. And if you have been able to do that, I think the rest of the things are simply irrelevant as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pandey. Now we are opening the floor to audience questions. So we have a few questions here. I'm flashing one of the questions here on the screen. This is from Atharvazad, and the question, if I pronounce your name correctly, please help me with pronouncing your name in the chat box. So in the meantime, the question goes: how to ensure effective blended learning in countries with relatively low or insufficient internet and penetration rate, given this mode of learning is quite probably going to be a predominant one?
So, who is this question addressed to?
This question has not been addressed to any particular panelist. So, who would like to take this question forward?
More of face to face.
I can speak a little bit on this.
Yes,
Hong Kong,
yes,
sure.
I said Hong Kong is a highly technological place, but when I began to do blended learning some 5-6 years ago, and thought about the different designs, at some point I realized that students in Hong Kong are located in different buildings with different internet capacities. And even in Hong Kong, students don't have the same accessibility to these kind of infrastructures, facilities, right? So the only way, in my opinion, to address this issue is to increase time for asynchronous learning and remove the teacher from this driver's seat and let students actually interact and engage each other in various types of collaborative exchanges, questions, postings in the common space somewhere, but just giving them a little bit more time to participate and learn.
All right. So, Dr. Pandey, would you like to?
Yeah, I'm just telling that, that we have to see what is our focus. Focus is to reach out to the children. Now, if they do not have the internet connectivity, we just can't leave them, right? So other ways, as Professor Anatoly was saying, that making it asynchronous as much as possible, and also bringing them on the campus as much as possible, depending upon their circumstances and the courses that they are doing. There may be many courses in which the online may not simply work, right? So making this blending also flexible and interventional, So if you can come on the campus for 1 or 2 days, but how can we utilize the other days as interventional, So I'm available online. I'm available in person also. Let me know what are your circumstances. So that could be a trade-off, as you asked in your earlier question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pandey. I think Professor Divina, if you can please.
Yes, it's a question. I'm working with African students in Africa. I've had to deal with a lot, and we were hoping that online learning would help them. And there are centers, a lot of, at least in Francophone Africa, centers for blended learning and for e-learning, where the students actually can go on the spot. We experienced recently this kind of issue also with young people, and one of the things that is the future for these countries is definitely mobile phones. They all are equipped. I don't know how they do it, if they steal it, if they are offered it, if their foundations are putting the emphasis on that, whatever. But to me, it seems that the future of blended learning is mobile in countries with poor access, believe it or not. And that means designing the course for mobile phones, that kind of screen or that kind of stream, vertical, etc. And making contents that are readable, that are easily accessible that way, to me seems very important. And then, as I was saying earlier, the fallback on paper, but not paper as the massing thing that you're given at the beginning. Take that. This is the handbook. Bye-bye. But as what are the takeoffs and what are we keeping? What is the important stuff that you have contributed or we have contributed? Let's say. And then don't forget the communities of practice. Don't forget that people have many ways of sharing practices. One of my best experience is having students and women calling in a radio station with their questions and their learning question. The journalist in the radio station consulting internet and then giving on the radio the internet response so that they can apply it on the ground. So the mix of high-tech and low-tech, again, is another kind of blending that we should not deprive ourselves of. And people can be very creative that way. And I have trust.
Thank you so much for that one, Professor. So the next question on the stage, this is the question, especially topical today, is the condition, status of flourishing. So in the context of refugees and migrant educators, their access to digital teaching tools, pedagogical support, and professional continuity. What might be some of the resources available to them? So basically, what are the resources available for educators to foster blended learning? If the panelists can share some of the thoughts on this, it would be great. Okay, Professor Schwartzman, would you like to take it forward? Professor, you're on mute.
Yeah. Okay.
If you can unmute. Yes.
First of all, I think this is in some ways related to the previous question, because I think it's very tempting to generalize about like particular countries that have low internet access. I mean, the United States is multiple nations within a nation. And that is that very good internet access and support resources, technology is heavily concentrated in urban and suburban areas and not rural areas. And it also maps to income and race. And I might add that from the standpoint of students who are from migrant and immigrant populations, the very first thing that needs to happen, and I'm talking from the student perspective, and we can look at the instructor's perspective also, but the very first thing that has to happen for any of these things that we're talking about is a change in mindset, that internet access needs to be understood as something that is not a privilege that is then monopolized by commercial providers for profit. And I remember when I was teaching a fully online course, and I went to a conference in Australia, and I was just delighted because there were internet cafes on every block. It was just so easy to go online. Come back to the United States, and even in the middle of New York City or San Francisco or something like that, theoretically you have great internet access, but it's pay to play. So, for example, you would have to go into a fancy hotel lobby and hope you didn't get kicked out. So, as far as the okay, I'm seeing clarification of the question. That starts getting into that starts getting into like incentive and reward systems professionally for educators, and some of you might be able to speak to that. There's also an equity issue on the instructor side. During the pandemic, I mean, we had particularly some of our part-time instructors literally teaching their courses from the parking lot of the university because it was the only Wi-Fi. It was the only Wi-Fi available for them. So, yeah.
Yes, if I may add, I had also a different interpretation of the question.
Professor Frommer, you're on. Yeah.
Yeah. We have MOOCs for migrants. So of course, the answer for me is always going to be MOOCs because they are available online and they're free. What we realized when we conducted courses or experiments with migrants is that the big mistake we're making was to push on them what we thought they needed. So thinking, oh, you need more of this, you need to. But in fact, the best experiment I've seen, and it's still being conducted right now, was to go back to their country of origin and people there and make them discuss with us about their expectations and their needs, either coming to our countries or forced or chosen, because migrants, some of them do it by choice. And so it's better if you do that, if it's needs based, and you can be surprised. And for instance, people did not necessarily ask for their status to be recognized, but they wanted to be able to navigate the legislation in our country. Where to apply to be recognized as a teacher, where to show the degree that you have, etc. And so it's more a how-to kind of thing they've been asking for than give us the equivalent of a degree and that's it. So it's I think again here we have to let migrants and people around migrants in their country speak and provide the information so that then when you're in the MOOC or even when you're on a face-to-face interaction with them, you're not just forcing your own vision of migrants on them and treat them with the respect that is required to their situation.
Thank you so much for that one, Professor Frommer. The last question that we'll be taking for now would be this one from Kartika. So the question is, blended learning means to blend human relations with technology. Synchronous and asynchronous are the technique. How do you assess the learning process so far are effective, including the effective evaluation? So if we can quickly have Dr. Christopher Hill, Dr. Schwartzman, Dr. Pandey, if you can quickly come in and others can join in and we'll wrap up quickly. So there you go.
Okay, I think the not very good answer is going to be we don't yet. We're still struggling with this. There are mechanisms that we put into place about the authenticity of assessment and sort of engagement, and they work up to a point. But we're attempting to find a perfect solution to an imperfect process of engagement, and at the moment we're not there yet. And certainly as many colleagues have pointed out, we're trying to employ techniques that we used for face-to-face in-classroom teaching to a completely new method of delivery, and it doesn't map. And so you either overly penalize somebody for doing something that they haven't done, or they've done something differently, or how come everybody's grades went up during the pandemic? Like it's been a very messy reality. And so the honest answer is we can't and we don't yet, but we are obviously working on it. So that's not a great answer, but I think it's an honest one.
All right. Dr. Pandey, if you could quickly, if you'd like to add on to that.
No, I think the last words have been said on the questions that you are posing, so probably I'll pass it.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey. All right, so we'll move on to the next. Okay, Professor Frommer, yes.
Professor Devina wants to say something, please.
Yes.
On the effective, definitely on the MOOC side, have conducted, we had questions about that at the end for students to position themselves, and we've also verified what they said in the questionnaire. We're scrapping all their exchanges online and analyzing them, in a statistical way, with some labels and things like that. And what they like best is definitely the participatory approach. The fact that they have peer-to-peer exchanges and that the teachers are not teachers. That's what comes most in terms of affect, which is to say, what everybody says about the horizontal approach that the online world provides, and where suddenly we are all on a mosaic, and who's who first, who cares, as long as exchange is coming out and all that. So there is a taste, and I think there's desire, probably because young people are in the habit of exchanging on social media, but there should be something social about the learning much more than before. And I would add social to blended learning, if you want. Social blended learning as maybe the best way of expressing, I think, what we all have been saying here. That one of the lessons we've learned is that knowledge is it's not just something that's out there cold and in marble. It's something that is like a dough. I'm going to continue the cooking metaphor of a blender. It's a cookie dough, okay? and it has to be, massaged in different directions so that the message gets across.
Thank you so much for that one, Professor Frome. Finally, we have come towards the end of this panel discussion. So I have one question where each of the panelists will spend about 45 seconds to 60 seconds to just respond. If there is one thing that they want our attendees to take away with them from this discussion, what would be that one thing? If you can quickly keep it short, succinct, and brief, so we can move towards the conclusion. So thank you so much. Who'd like to go first?
So, okay, let me take the brunt first. so if there are some pure students among your, attendees, I think the takeaway for them is that there is a lot of hope and optimism in blended learning, and blended learning is going to stay here, and therefore they have to respond to it, and by keeping their cameras more often on rather than off. And for the teachers and educators, the takeaway is that, we have learned a lot in these 18 months. We are still learning, we are evolving, and we'll make this blended learning perhaps a new norm in the manner in which we will have the best of both, face-to-face and online.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pandey, Professor Dr. Schwartzman, if you can please share your thoughts.
Sure. I think that one of the most urgent needs we have regarding blended learning is that we need to continue these food metaphors, very hungry for more concrete evidence of efficacy. And we need to get much more granular in, for example, our student evaluations of teaching. It is incredible that we still use in many universities the exact same teaching evaluation forms for online, face-to-face, blended courses. And we need to, in a word, listen to the students, find out what's working, and adjust our practices in light of that, and then negotiate the relationship between what works with the students and what our student learning objectives and educational outcomes are.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schwartzman. Dr. Hill?
I would say I agree with what everything's been said. I would add we can't be afraid of change. We have to let go of some of the things. The beginning of the pandemic, we wanted to go back because back was safe. And that's very normal, very human. But back wasn't perfect. And there are many things within the educational space that were flawed. And so we need to accept that and move forwards and not be afraid of change. and not be afraid of making some mistakes, because that's going to happen. But I think the future has to evolve with what makes sense for the context as we move forward. So I'm not saying let go of everything in the past. I'm not saying keep everything from the past, but blend it, right? Let's have a Rojak or a Bouillabaisse or something that has everything chucked in at once.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hill. Dr. Oleksienko.
I would recommend everyone to think about student empowerment, how you empower your students. The students are very capable people, and who can learn from each other, often much more than they learn from their teachers. And they often appreciate freedom of learning. And teachers' freedom to teach and students' freedom to learn are interdependent in many ways. And we need to really understand how these two processes enrich each other. And at the same time, I would say all that empowerment and enrichment and freedom can probably come more into reality, into play, when we experiment more, when we innovate more, when we allow ourselves to go beyond, as Professor Schwartzman just mentioned, like going beyond and trying just to understand how we cross those boundaries, how we learn more and outside of our traditional boxes. So that would be my major advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oleksienko. So finally, we have come towards the end of the panel discussion.
No,
part
Dr.
of the
Devina is left. Dr. Devina.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, proceed.
Yes,
Minute,
Professor Fromme. Yes.
You can't steal that.
No, I just to go behind after you. I would say we should look at it the other way around. In fact, maybe what we've learned is that universities are probably the biggest platforms, in fact, but they don't see themselves as platforms because they are looking still behind the brick and mortar presence, but they also are online platforms, and their influences in young people's ways of behaving. And they're definitely, and I think we've all more or less said that, the biggest place for youthful sociability, the screen, being on screen, showing. To do what? To build the rest, to build e-presence, to build the blending, etc. Because if we ask them
I think we are being reconnected to Professor Fromme.
So that's what all I've said. Are you sorry? Did you hear me or not?
Yeah, Aryan, go ahead. Yeah.
Did you hear me?
Okay.
Do you want me to repeat?
All right. I think I'm having some connectivity issues.
Yeah, you're the one who's disconnected, Ariane.
All right. All right.
Just
ways of technology. Yeah. So thank you so much to all our panelists. Like I keep saying, this is a moment for us to shape intentional and inclusive policies and nurturing practices towards creating an ecosystem that's truly empathetic, compassionate, mindful, and fosters a space for all educators and students to grow and thrive. Educators and school leaders, I believe, truly have the power and potential to affect this positive transformation. I do understand that we still have a lot of questions that we may not have been able to cover or answer them sufficiently through this panel discussion. And we do look forward to hearing from you your thoughts, ideas, and suggestions towards ensuring effective blended learning. Please send me an email or tag us in your post on social media, and I would be delighted to know more from you. Also, do suggest what you'd like our future discussions to be on. We have a masterclass on hybrid learning and assessments on the 6th of October at 11:30 UTC. Hope to see you at the masterclass. I thank you all for sharing such amazing ideas at the 16th Online Educational Leadership Forum. Also, do not forget to check out the booths at the exhibition where you'd find more information on TraverseLink. TraverseLink is an innovative LMS platform. It moves away from the traditional ways of executing online self-paced courses. Also, you can check out the Hybrid Learning Certified School Award booth to see if your school would be interested in capacity building and community. And you can also check out the Ed Magazine booth. So on behalf of the Global Citizenship Foundation, the Council for Global Citizenship Education, Traverse.link, and all our attendees, I extend my deepest gratitude to our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules and enriching us with the discourse through their amazing ideas, insights, and experiences. Also, I thank you for being a part of the OELF family. Now, here are a couple of announcements for folks who are interested in being part of the OELF membership. So I'll be sharing that towards the end. So I'm really grateful that you all were here and enriched this discussion and discourse on transforming education for human flourishing. We really appreciate the conversations, the time, the insights and efforts that all of you have contributed to driving this extremely crucial discussion towards shaping the futures of education for generations of young people. Now you can proceed to the speed networking event, which will start in the next couple of minutes. But before that, I want Dominic to please join us and share a couple of thoughts about the LMS platform that he has. It's a very interesting platform. I really appreciate if you can go check out how it works, because this kind of an LMS platform I have not seen before. So that's one reason why I'm emphasizing on that, not because Traverse is with us, but because the kind of transformative thing that they've brought in to the world of LMSs. So if I can have Dominic raise his hand. Quickly, we'll have a couple of words from him, and then we'll wrap up. We'll move on to the networking. All right, so let me just bring in Dominic here. All right. All right. Okay, ways of technology, like I tell you. So we'll try connecting with Dominic, but in the meantime, I wish you all happy speed networking. See you soon. Until then, take care, stay safe, and spread love and compassion. Our world needs it more. So take care, bye-bye, and stay safe. And once again, thank you to all the panelists.
Thank you, Aryan.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.
It was a
see you at the
experience listening to all of you.
See you at the speed networking. Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.